Hello and welcome to our second SMB Growth Chat. Today we'll be talking about maximizing your website speed. This is Galina from SiteGround, and today I will host, joining us with our special guest and expert, Arnold Hellemans, online strategy consultant and SEO expert, and Nat Miletic, entrepreneur and agency owner. We've prepared a bunch of exciting questions for the experts, covering everything from the importance of site speed for small business owners and cost-effective tips and tools to maximize your site speed. So make sure you listen in. In case you have questions of your own, you can post them on the Twitter space or tweet them using the chat hashtag, and we'll try to answer them at the end if we have time. We'll also record this chat, so make sure you follow SiteGround on Twitter where we'll share it. With that said, let's get started. Starting in with the first question. Why should small businesses care for their site speed? Do you want to start, Nat?
Sure, yeah, I can start. No problem. Yeah, I mean, site speed obviously is important for a number of reasons. The main one's probably the user experience. You know, people kind of interact with your site and spending time on it and contacting you and whatever your goals are of that website. And it's even more important when it comes to e-commerce because there's a lot of research done in terms of the waiting around and going through the checkout process and how long that takes directly impacts sales and signups and whatever you're trying to do with an e-commerce site. So it's even more important from an e-commerce perspective. But it also is I'm not sure how important, but it is a ranking factor as well for SEO. And Google has kind of revealed that it's one of the metrics they look at as well from an SEO perspective. So if you're trying to rank for stuff as well for some keywords or whatever, you also want to look at your site speed. So that it's important from kind of a technical perspective for SEO, and it's also important, more importantly, for user experience and people for the visitors of your site.
I'd agree with that. I think a great website to get some insights on like the importance for conversions and stuff is pwostats.com, where there's use cases where big and small companies show what the impact was on the business in terms of traffic, conversion, and all kinds of stuff. I think secondly, I personally don't think it's a direct influencer of ranking. However, if your site is a lot faster, you'll get more pages crawled. And secondly, it's a big signal if the user can't get to your site or it takes too long, they might not be able to consume the information on your site and go back to Google search or Bing for this matter, and then click on another result, which is basically a signal that you haven't been able to answer a customer's query or a search engine's user's query, which is a big influencer of rankings.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so should we move on to the second question? What are the most
Sure.
important things that SMB owners overlook, which can have a major effect on their website performance?
Sure. Do you want us to kind of switch up the order this time, or you want me to go first again?
I'm happy to give some pointers. I think a big one is images and excessive JavaScript and CSS. So these are scripts. So I see a lot of websites that use templates or builders for WordPress or for other sites, and they just keep adding functionalities to it. Right, another plugin for this and another plugin for that, or another add-in for this, or and that just adds a lot of code to the weight of your website. So because in a lot of cases you only use a tiny part, so a share button, but the rest of the functionality of that plugin you're not using, but it still bloats or basically makes your website obese, which doesn't really help. So I think it's not scrutinizing what you want on the website, but just adding a lot of things in, even have plugins in place that you don't use the functionality of. So that's a big one, especially on WordPress. And the other one is image optimization. I see a lot of websites using PNGs when a JPEG is a lot faster and a lot smaller. But people think that it should be PNG, which I only use PNGs when it's like one color or two colors, or when it needs to be transparent. So those are the big ones. So file formats, sizes, and bloated scripts because of excessive use of plugins.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with all that. And I would just add, from my experience, I think the biggest thing is one of the main things toward is the hosting and what goes on in the background. So a lot of folks opt for kind of per shared hosting, and typically for WordPress sites, you need a little bit more horsepower if you're just creating kind of like a static website. The shared hosting might be okay, but it all starts with good quality hosting, I think, to improve performance. The other thing is, the caching of the website, and having sort of good tools sort of in the background there to speed up site, and things like content delivery networks. If your website is being accessed all over the world, that's also important so that you're serving the website, closer to where the visitor actually is. The big one I see is the images as well. So that's probably the most common we see when we're optimizing websites, is this large images. And there are ways to compress those and to make them a little bit more efficient. There's a lot of free tools out there, like Tiny PNG and Tiny JPEG, some of those resources where you can go and kind of compress your images. And there are also plugins for WordPress. WordPress makes it really easy as well with a bunch of different plugins. I think SiteGround Optimizer as well can be used to convert images to WebP format, which is even more efficient. And so there's a bunch of different things you can do. But I think one of the most important things that people tend to overlook is good quality hosting, because that can really make or break your website performance. And I have a ton of tips actually on my website. It's in my Twitter profile. If you want to go to my blog, I have a ton of resources for speeding up and optimizing websites, with a bunch of tips, actionable tips and stuff that you can use to speed things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Oh, sorry, Arnold. So yeah, we should keep our plugins to the minimum, avoid using large images and PNG image formats, and choose our hosting providers carefully, and preferably choose someone who also offers caching. So on to the next question. Could you name 3 cost-effective tools or features small business owners can leverage to improve sites performance and loading times?
Yeah, definitely. You've got all kinds of image compression tools out there. Most of them are free, like EasyGIF and like loads of them. Start reading up on what are the best formats, as Nat was saying. So WebP, not in every case, but in a majority of cases, WebP is a lot better than JPEG, or not a lot, but 10-20% better in size than JPEG. Then you've got also you can convert PNGs to JPEG. So I think that is a really a big one. I'm quite a big fan of using a free plugin, which is called Lightspeed, which basically does all the optimization for you. And especially if you have a smaller site, you can just install the plugin, create an account. You don't need a lot of credits, because it will fill your free tier. If you have, say, 20 pages or 30 or 40 pages, 40 images, it's all fine. It will automatically do all the optimization for you in terms of images, and also lazy load them and like loads more. So I think that's a good resource. I think the other one is you could use. I like using a CDN. So that can be Cloudflare or the other one, but Cloudflare free works for most small businesses, and it will, if you combine it with the caching plugin, it will take care of most of that. So those are probably the things that help the most.
Yeah, agreed. My personal preference, like for free or inexpensive tools, caching is a must for especially for WordPress sites. So WordPress, takes a little bit more juice to run, because it It's a database type of really it's more like an application. So it's making calls to a database every time, a user does a certain function or visits a page. So caching is a must, meaning that it creates kind of like static pages on the server that are quicker to come up on a user's browser. So things that I think the SiteGround Optimizer plugin is one that's now available to any site owner. I don't think you need to have SiteGround in order to use it. Before we use WP Rocket, it's a paid plugin. So it might be out of reach initially. If you're just starting out and trying to keep costs low, I would recommend something like W3 Cache is another one that we use all the time, that we used to use all the time actually, and it's also really good and can optimize your site a bit. There are also a number of different free image optimization plugins. Pixel comes to mind. Again, SiteGround Optimizer does the same thing. It has some image compression and serving images in a WebP format. So that's another tool that I would use that's free and easy to set up. And then of course, Cloudflare, you can use their free service in order to get some benefits from a content delivery network perspective, as I was explaining earlier, but also it offers a little bit more protection in terms of security as well. And that's also a rec tool that's fairly simple to set up and that it's free. And again, back to the hosting, a lot of hosters have a lot of this stuff baked in already, so they have their own CDN network. They have sometimes their own plugins help with performance, and yeah, those would be kind of the free or inexpensive things that you should focus on as a small business owner. And if you're in the process of starting up a website or starting to build one, um, as we said earlier, I think one of the main things to pick a good hosting provider, and then also pick a good, if you're using WordPress, pick a fast and efficient theme, because a fast and efficient theme will make all of the difference of loading those scripts, as we were saying earlier, and the scripts that you load, bloated site, a lot of that comes from a theme and a bunch of plugins if you're using a bunch of plugins. So, pick a fast and efficient theme, and that will go a long way in terms of website performance as well. There's a lot of good, free ones out there as well for WordPress that you use, like Astra or GeneratePress. Those are very fast and efficient, and they have free versions as well, so you can use those if you're just in the process of building a site.
So much for being so exhaustive on the topic. My key takeaways here are to use an image optimization tool such as the SiteGround Optimizer, a CDN, and an optimized theme.
Yep.
Okay, so the next question: what should SMB owners check and keep in mind when applying caching mechanisms on their website?
You could go first. Yeah, it's all good.
Um, so I think one of the things is that when you refresh pages, make sure that you purge the cache, because otherwise people will still see the old version, or you won't be knowing what's happening. You've removed the link; it's still there. So understanding that caching needs to be updated, needs to be purged, which means throw it away, create a new cached version, because otherwise you won't be seeing a lot of the changes you make. I think that's a big one. Let's see, what was another one? Another one is that I've seen people also cache like the authors, and then it just breaks a lot of things. So yeah, that's my advice when it comes to caching.
Yeah, caching can be, a complicated topic, especially for business owners. It's very technical. I would say if you're looking to utilize caching, just understand that there's different types of caching, and maybe, you use a tool that's a little bit more user intuitive, because it can get fairly complex. I mentioned, W3 earlier, which is an excellent tool, but it's very complicated to use, especially for somebody who's not technical and, isn't really interested in doing technical things to their website. So, um, part of the reason why we use something like WP Rocket, which is a lot more simple, and the options are a little bit easier to understand and stuff. Definitely agree with the previous comment around the, making sure the cache is purged. So when you're making changes to your website, just once you're done making changes to pages and whatever, just, hit that clear cache button so that you can kind of purge everything from the cache and serve up the latest version of your website. That's usually something people overlook. And yeah, just pick something, simple. We can go into a lot of detail about caching and different mechanisms and different kind of methods and options and stuff, but it tends to be overly technical, I think, for small business owners that don't really, aren't really interested in that. So yeah, pick a tool that's kind of easy to use. SiteGround Optimizer is also very easy to use. It has some, fairly simple options and also tests. So that's one thing we didn't mention is, when you're setting up caching, a lot of these caching tools have other options there, like to minimize your JavaScript or to remove CSS and things like that. And some of those things you have to be careful with because they can break the look and feel of your site or break certain functionality on your site. So just kind of turn them on one by one, test, and see what impact they make when you implement them because they could potentially break your site.
All right, guys. So don't forget to purge your cache when making changes if you don't want to wonder where did the changes go. And best is to try and find a caching plugin that clears the cache automatically, like the SiteGround Optimizer, which does it so you don't have to do it. So what are some tools SMB owners can use for website performance tracking? Arnold, do you want to start now?
Yeah, sure. I really like for simple tests to use GT metrics. It just gives you a good overview. It's free to use, and they even got a bookmarklet. So you go to a page, you click it, it will automatically generate a report. You can of course use what I really like in Google Chrome. You can basically go right click and then inspect element. You'll get like the console, and then you go to the performance tab. So you can do a lighthouse test, which will basically test the whole page. And they've like half a year ago, they introduced something really cool, which is performance insights, which will literally show you which elements on the site influence the core web vital scores. Then, of course, you've got the Google PageSpeed tool you can use. So it's a combination of all of these, and they're all free. Of course, there's plenty other ones out there. Probably Nat will expand on the others, but so for me, it's GT Metrics. It's basically the tools that are built into Google Chrome in the console. And page feed insights, and yeah, those are the main ones.
Yeah, thanks, Arno. Yeah, those are great. We use the same kind of tool set. I do like GT Metrics quite a bit because it's used some kind of unique, a little bit more information than PageSpeed Insights does on Google. And we like PageSpeed Insights because it's kind of what Google would look at as well. So in your Google in your search console, some of those metrics around performance and stuff are tied to what you see in PageSpeed Insights. So we do like to use that one to check the performance there as well. Another one that wasn't mentioned that we use all the time is called webpagetest.org. It's also a great website. It gives you a lot of different information and suggestions on how to improve site speed. It's also a free one, and you can, it's a very comprehensive one as well. Of course, yeah, Chrome Development Tools, has its own thing. I would just be careful with that one because that one show you if you're running performance tests on that, it will show you kind of like localized performance tests versus. So if you have a very, very fast machine and a very fast internet connection, by default, it'll show you that you have great performance. But if you test it with, some other options like PageSpeed Insight stuff that are using, like 3G for mobile and stuff like that, your performance picture is going to look a lot different. So there's a bunch of different tools out there. There's quite a few. They tend to be a little bit more complex for a small business owner to use and understand. But they're very useful if you're testing, especially if you're working with the developer, you should test these sites just to see how well they're performing. And then if you are having issues, to go back to your developer and say, can we, fix these and fix the performance if it's lacking. The thing I would mention also is if you're using SEO tools like Ahrefs, SEMrush, they also have performance, like they ask for speed. So if you're doing like, audits of a website, for example, it'll show you some metrics around speed and how to give you some tips how to improve speed and stuff like that as well. So there's a lot of tools out there, a lot of great free tools actually. And I would highlight, GT Metrics, web page speed test from Google, and the webpagetest.org is another one that's really good, and all three are free.
Indeed, tools such as GTmetrix and Google PageSpeed are a great starting point to understand what are the core performance problems of your site and start working on them. And by the way, I haven't heard of the webpagetest.org, and I'll definitely check this out after the chat. So, talking about speed metrics, what should SMB owners keep track of when it comes to their website speed metrics? Arnold, do you want to take it?
Yeah, sure. I think the best thing is if you get started on a project, I basically have a list. So I basically say that in terms of performance, you set a goal of not exceeding BB, but aiming for AA on GT metrics, and basically say the page cannot, any page that is built on your site should not exceed 1 megabyte. This will basically help you get a great baseline. So I think that is that's a good one. So page size, and the other one is looking in Search Console. You can see the core web vitals if you have enough visits. I think per page it was 100 or 200 a month. A great other way of tracking it, if you have a slightly larger website, is using Crux data. So this is aggregated data on a domain level, but you can also get it on page level for all of your users that have actually used your site using Chrome. So that's Crux. So if you Google Crux dashboard or Crux, I think it's g.co/Crux. So those are the ones take into account. I would always look at image sizes. I would always aim for less than 100 kilobytes at max. Yeah, so those are the big ones to take into account.
Yeah, I don't know if I have too much to add here, but definitely, for some of the sites that we're tracking, we're tracking that using SEO tools, and I know, a lot of business owners probably aren't going to be using those. So I'm not sure, how useful that would be, for this group, but definitely, doing a monthly check using one of the tools that we mentioned, like GT Metrics or PageSpeed Insights, and getting some metrics on a monthly basis just to see how your website is performing is probably a good idea. And keeping track of, if you're adding new content and new functionality, especially to your website, understanding how those in performance, because they can, just by adding a little plugin here and there, or adding, like Google Analytics, for example, or saying, it can actually, or like bot like one of those bot things like reCAPTCHA or something, those things tend to add a lot of scripts to a website and can slow things down. So just if you are adding functionality, just kind of go back and doing a speed test as well, and just to see if, if it impacts your performance of the website or not. So just doing that on a regular basis is a good idea.
Awesome. By the way, Arnold mentioned something about page size as a metric, but can you give us a rough idea? What is the preferable page size? Is it like 1 megabyte, or it's not that easy to specify?
I always aim for 1 megabyte max, because that just helps you scrutinize anything you do. As most SEOs will always tell you, it depends, because some pages can't really be done in a different way, or you're stuck to a theme or whatever. But that's something I'm usually aiming for. And to be honest, I think a lot of websites can bring it all the way down to 600-700 kilobytes or even less per page. But um, it might be wishful thinking. I've literally seen pages of 80 megs being loaded. So it's ridiculous, but it still happens.
Okay, so we try to keep it below 1 megabyte by reducing image size, most of all, and using as minimum script as possible. Is that all right?
Exactly.
Yeah. One other thing that I always forget to mention is something that kind of sounds harmless, but can impact things quite a bit is all the fonts. Like, and fonts can also be things like those little emojis or like, uh, social share buttons, for example. You would think that, adding a little Twitter button or something to your website is harmless, but actually, if you do it the wrong way, it can load a bunch of like, font files, which are just as bad as inefficient images. And so that can also balloon the size. It seems kind of harmless, but it can also balloon the size of a page. So there's a lot of those little that, you might overlook if you're just like adding plugins or functionality to it that can definitely impact performance. And so, something to keep in mind as well. Just if you are at,
Yeah.
yeah,
100%, Nat, 100%. And I love playing around with transfonder, because a lot of fonts, they basically support all the languages, which is a freaking nightmare, because if your whole web page is English, why are you getting all the Nordic, Swedish fonts and Norwegian and Spanish and whatever? Because you don't need them. And you can easily, with transfonder, just create a subset that you use, and you go from, say, 35 kilobytes all the way down to 10. Yeah, and I fully agree. Um, like every little bit helps, and you need to be scrutinizing it all. Agreed.
Yes, indeed, fonts and emoji are often overlooked. Do you have any suggestions how we use their impact? I know about fonts preloading. Our plugin also has it. Is preloading safe fonts a good way to reduce loading times?
Um, yes, it is, but I guess the moral of the story is, if you can change the size of the font files being transferred, that's always a good thing to do. But you can always like first preload and then swap it. I think that's another great thing. But I think that the thing here is that you don't want to ship any you're not using, or just be wary that you don't load that all the plugins support a lot of fonts that they're loading. Um, so yeah,
yeah,
that
100%. Yeah, fonts is a tricky one. It could definitely, if you're using WordPress, and you add a plugin, they could be loading a bunch of fonts in the background, and you don't really have a way of kind of seeing that unless, using that plugin, for example. One of the main things I would be wary of is something like, those little social icons, for example. Like, if you see font awesome, just run away. If you see something using font awesome, I would say just kind of look for another option altogether, because so what you can do instead of loading those social share icons, for example, use an SVG of that. So if you need like a Twitter button or a Facebook button or something like that, for your site, use an SVG version of that. It's going to be much smaller than the font, and usually people only need like, two or three of those. So if you can, use that version instead, that's preferable. Also, another thing that's kind of a hack as well, but a good one from a performance perspective, is a lot of people use Google Fonts, and your Google Fonts are hosted outside of your website, typically using the Google service. So you're kind of, making trips to their servers in order to download fonts and stuff, and it's not very efficient. There are options to download those fonts sometimes locally and then use them from your site locally. There are some plugins that do that as well. And so you can use a local version of that Google font, for example, downloaded from their website, embedded into your site. It's going to be a little bit faster, and that'll also help with performance when it comes to font sizes and page sizes in general, and loading fonts more efficiently. Fonts usually get overlooked. I think Images are probably the more common one that we see, but once you kind of solve the image problem, typically, especially in the WordPress world, and if you're not using an efficient theme, you could be loading, your fonts can make a huge portion of the website size, um, in addition to the images. So it's something to look out for.
Perfect, guys. I think I learned something new today, how to keep my social media icons without slowing down my site speed. So thank you so much for the insights. Now move on to the next question, which is about SEO and how does performance affect it? And are there any specific optimizations that would improve your rankings? Nat, do you want to start?
Sure.
Or Arnold?
Sure. Can you just repeat that one again, the question? Sorry.
Yes, sorry. It's about how does performance affect your SEO, and are there any specific optimizations that would improve your rankings?
hmm Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of debate still, like, in the SEO industry regarding, how much of a factor it is. Um, I think it's a factor. It might be an indirect one. I'm not really sure. I mean, nobody really knows, I guess, other than Google, what all the important ones are. But I think that, if you look at some of there are other factors that are more important. So I think that's the biggest thing here to keep in mind. From an SEO perspective, yes, you should. There's an indirect, maybe a direct impact on SEO in terms of website performance, but like it's not like, if you solve your performance issues and your site is the fastest loading out there that you're going to outrank Apple, right? It's just not going to happen, but it's going to help with other things. And I think, looking at, especially if you have a e-commerce site, and focusing on conversions and purchases and whatever it is you're selling, I think the performance piece is even more important in that case because it can impact your conversions and people leaving site and abandonment rates and stuff like that. So it's super important from that perspective. And again, bounce rates, as I was saying earlier, like, that will definitely, your slow site will definitely impact that. So you do want to take that into consideration and keep that under control. Again, I've got a lot of tips on improving performance. Like for me, when it comes to WordPress, like the core things are having a good quality hosting provider, using caching and using some of those tools that we talked about earlier to keep the website performing fast, and keeping some of those assets that you're using for the website, like images and fonts that we talked about, and scripts, and things that might be impacted by you adding a bunch of plugins or using an inefficient theme, that can all add to the bad performance. So yeah, so that's what I'd like to say about that piece.
I would agree on that. No, I think there is a win to be had because if your website is a lot faster, it means that the Googlebot and Bingbot will basically more time, aka will index and crawl more pages. So any changes you make get picked up a lot faster. So I think there's that. I don't necessarily think it's a ranking factor. It does influence rankings, but it wouldn't make sense if you have the ultimate resource and you are the best known expert for something and people search for that. And even if your website is performing like a second slower than a competitor that doesn't have that, it doesn't mean the competitor will outrank you. I don't believe that. Um, so, but for me, site speed is a form of hygiene. It makes everything a lot easier. If you have well-optimized website, it makes changes a lot easier, maintenance, doing A/B tests or whatever other things you want to do. And on top of that, depending on how big you are also reducing your carbon footprint. And I think a great little tool out there is a carbon footprint calculator for websites. So when you go there, you can throw it in and you can basically see how much carbon you are basically producing and how you stack against the rest of the web. I use it especially with larger clients to show that we're not on the right track. So there's all these implications. So for me, it's just hygiene. So just do it. Give your website a workout, and just trim the obesity off. Is it going to impact SEO? It might, but not necessarily. I think there's other things that will impact it more.
Okay, so my key takeaway is that performance indirectly has an impact on SEO because it affects the web crawling and user experience. So update your site regularly and keep plugins to the minimum and use optimization tools and give your site a workout. I like that tip. Great. So the last question for today is how to focus your performance efforts to have the best effect on your conversions and return on investments. Nat, do you want to start?
Can you sorry again. Can you repeat that one again? My connection I think is cutting out. So.
Sure, no problem. So, how to focus your performance efforts to have the best effect on your conversions and return on investments?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a summary type question, I think, in terms of everything we've talked about already. It also, um, it also kind of depends on what your goals are and what some of what functionality you have on your website. Again, an e-commerce site is a lot different than kind of like an informational site, and so you want to make sure that you kind of define what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve with the website. Having good performance, I think, is important in either case. It might be more important if you're selling products and having kind of e-commerce capabilities. It might be a little bit more important than having more of an informational site. And it's also harder to achieve those, high performance metrics in that case as well, because you're adding more complexity and functionality to it. So it depends on your goals. I think it's always a good idea to, use some of these tools and tips that we talked about today to enhance your website performance. I think it's going to help you regardless of your goals. It's going to help you also with your brand as well, and generally speaking with your business. And so, some of these suggestions, track your results on an ongoing basis, at least once a month. Go and run a speed test and see what you can improve. And also, another thing is mentioned is it's kind of a continuous improvement type of an exercise as well. There's always stuff to fix. Doesn't mean that you have to fix everything right away, but make small improvements as you go and keep at it and keep improving your website. It's going to go a long way in terms of helping you achieve your goals.
Yeah, agreed on that. I think how to focus your performance efforts. Start with looking at your best converting pages. So the landing pages that lead to most business, if you start improving them, that should most likely have the biggest impact. I think if you want to get advanced, is say you have an e-commerce site, make sure that if somebody puts something in the basket, you start pre-fetching, pre-DNS, and pre-render the checkout page, so that if they click on checkout, it's instant. So just look at all the pre-render, just search for pre-render and it will tell you how that works. That is an amazing win, in my opinion. Yeah, there's also a piece of JavaScript which can do this based on previous users. It's I can't find it. I'll send it over. So yeah, that's where I would start. So start with your best converting pages and then work towards the other pages. So the ones that currently drive the biggest business or most leads or most sales, start there and then just work your way through the rest.
All right, so to summarize it as a list, start by checking which are your most important visited pages and ensure they load quickly and are optimized. And that could be your landing page or the shopping cart link on your site. And then work towards the other pages. And three, make sure you do this regularly, let's say on a monthly basis. Do you both agree?
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. So I think these were all the prepared questions for today. If the audience has a question, I think we have a couple of minutes to take an audience question. If not, we'll move on. So any questions, feel free to raise a hand or drop them in the chat. I'll just wait a few minutes and yeah.
So can anybody just raise a hand if they have a question? Or how would you like to do it?
Yeah, I think raising a hand would be would be great.
Or request to speak. That's the other one, right?
Yeah. I'm also checking the chat hashtag to see if there's something as we speak.
Maybe we already answered all the questions.
I think we did. It was a pretty extensive talk. Do you guys want to add something before we close the chat?
No, thank you for hosting us. I think it's always an interesting topic. There's a lot uh, to do. It can be a bit overwhelming, I think, for small business owners. When it comes to website performance, it tends to be a little bit technical. So what I would say is, um, make sure that you're using a good quality host provider. It'll go a long way, and you'll have, some of those tools already built in that make it easy, for you to achieve a good performance. Probably the first place I would look, and then in addition to that, I would look at a fast and efficient theme for WordPress if you are using WordPress. So those would be kind of my top two tips that I'd close off with. And again, thanks for hosting us. I think always an interesting topic to discuss.
Yeah, what can I say? I think I fully agree on that, what Nat was saying. And just have use some tools to get the insights and to get benchmark, to understand where your competitors are. You can also use GT Metrics to run it through other competitors, and you'll see where you stack up. Oh, and on a personal note, if you have any questions, just follow me on Twitter, or basically tag me on a post or a question. More than happy to answer them. Or if I follow you, we can do a DM, whatever. That's at Hellemans. And yeah, really enjoyed it, and hope it was useful for everyone.
Thank you so much, guys. And thanks for everyone who tuned in. We really hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. Thanks for all the valuable tips. We'll try to summarize them in a blog post as soon as we can. And make sure you follow us on social media and on Twitter and YouTube, where we'll post the recording of this chat, the answers. And thanks, everyone, and have a great week ahead.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.